The great hall of the Vraxian High Council stretched out like a frozen ocean of dark metal and cold light. Ambassador Zethkal stood in the center, his tall frame casting sharp shadows on the polished floor. His skin looked like living crystal, catching the blue glow from the ceiling and throwing it back in 1,000 tiny reflections. This was how all Vraxians looked, beautiful, cold, and hard as stone, around him. The 12 members of the High Council sat on raised platforms, their faces showing no emotion. They never showed emotion. Emotions were for lesser beings, for the weak species they had conquered across the galaxy. The Vraxians had built their empire on pure logic, on calculating the best way to win every battle before it began. Council leader Vorthan raised one pale hand, and images appeared in the air between them. The pictures showed a small blue planet, spinning slowly in the darkness of space. Earth, the newest world their scouts had found, and possibly the most interesting. "The humans are strange," Vorthan said, his voice echoing in the vast chamber. "They fight each other constantly. Their wars never end. They have split their one world into hundreds of small nations, each one suspicious of the others." Zethkal studied the images as they changed. He saw human cities with their chaotic mix of old and new buildings. He saw their primitive vehicles crawling along concrete roads. He saw their simple aircraft struggling through the atmosphere, nothing like the sleek ships that carried Vraxians between the stars. "They have nuclear weapons," another council member added. "But they still use chemical fuel to reach their own moon. They can destroy their planet, but they cannot leave it properly. Their technology is at least 500 years behind ours," said a third. "They have computers, but they are huge and slow. They have global communication, but it is clumsy and often fails." Zethkal nodded. This all made sense. The humans were clearly a young species, still learning how to use the tools they had discovered. Like children playing with fire, they were dangerous to themselves, but no real threat to anyone else. "What do you want me to do?" Zethkal asked. "Go to Earth," Vorthan replied. "Live among them. Study their leaders and their military. Learn how they think and what they fear. Then come back and tell us the best way to add their world to our empire." The ambassador felt a familiar excitement. This was what he had trained for his entire life. The Vraxians had conquered 17 different alien species, and Zethkal had helped with the last 4. Each time he had gone ahead as a scout, learning the enemy's weaknesses and finding the cracks in their defenses. "Do you want me to make contact with their governments?" he asked. "Not yet," Vorthan said. "First, we need to understand them. Use your biomimetic disguise. Become one of them. Watch how they behave when they think no one important is looking." Zethkal touched the small device attached to his spine. The biomimetic generator could change his appearance completely, making him look like any species he had studied. He had used it to spy on the Kelthrans, pretending to be one of their warrior caste. He had infiltrated the Moxtai by taking the form of their priest class. Each time the disguise had been perfect. "The humans will be even easier," he thought. "They are so divided, so focused on their own small problems. I can walk among them like a ghost." More images appeared in the air. These showed human soldiers in various uniforms, carrying weapons that looked crude compared to Vraxian energy rifles. Their vehicles were loud and slow, belching smoke and waste heat. Their ships were barely spaceworthy, held together with metal bolts and powered by controlled explosions. "They have courage," Vorthan admitted. "Our scouts report that human soldiers will fight even when victory is impossible. But courage without wisdom is just another weakness." Zethkal had seen this before. The Kelthrans had been brave too, charging into battle with their traditional weapons even when faced with modern firepower. Bravery was admirable, but it could not overcome superior technology and planning. "How long do I have?" he asked. "Take as much time as you need," Vorthan replied. "But remember, other species have found Earth too. The hegemony is already sending probe ships. The consortium has marked it as a potential resource world. If we wait too long, we will have to fight our own kind for the right to claim it." This was true. The galaxy was full of expanding empires, each one looking for new worlds to control. Earth was small and primitive, but it was rich in resources and had a large population that could be put to work. Several galactic powers would want to claim it. I understand, Zethkal said. I will leave immediately. The council members nodded in unison, their crystalline faces reflecting the cold light like mirrors. The meeting was over. Zethkal bowed formally and walked toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent hall. As he left the council chamber, Zethkal felt confident about his mission. He had read all the reports about humans, studied their broadcasts, and analyzed their behavior patterns. They were emotional, chaotic, and short-sighted. They spent more energy fighting each other than they did trying to improve their civilization. The Vraxians, by contrast, had achieved perfect unity 2,000 years ago. They had eliminated emotion from their society, replacing it with pure logic. They had no wars among themselves, no waste, no inefficiency. Every citizen knew their role and performed it perfectly. This was why they always won. While other species argued and fought and made mistakes, the Vraxians calculated the optimal solution to every problem. They had never lost a war because they never started a fight they could not win. Zethkal walked through the corridors of the capital city, past the geometric buildings and orderly streets. Everything was clean, quiet, and efficient. Citizens moved with purpose, their faces calm and focused. This was what civilization looked like when it was perfected. Soon, he would bring this same perfection to Earth. The humans would resist at first, of course, they always did. But once they understood that the Vraxian way was better, they would accept it. The smart ones always did. He reached the spaceport and boarded his ship, a sleek vessel designed for long-range reconnaissance. As the engines powered up, he took one last look at his homeworld. The crystal spires of the capital city rose into the purple sky, their surfaces reflecting the light of 3 suns. It was beautiful in its perfection, cold and clean and eternal. The ship lifted off silently, accelerating toward the edge of the system. Within hours, it would enter hyperspace and begin the journey to Earth. Zethkal settled into his cabin and began to review the files on human culture one more time. Their entertainment was violent and chaotic. Their news was full of disasters and conflicts. Their leaders seemed to change constantly, elected by populations that barely understood the issues they were voting on. It was a mess, a civilization that seemed to be falling apart even as it tried to hold itself together. They will be grateful when we bring them order, he thought. They will thank us for saving them from themselves. The ship jumped to hyperspace and Earth grew closer with each passing moment. Zethkal had no idea that he was about to encounter something that would change everything he believed about strength, about logic, and about what it truly meant to be alive. The journey to Earth would take 3 days. He spent the time preparing his disguise and practicing human mannerisms. By the time he arrived, he would be ready to walk among them as one of their own. He had no idea that Earth was about to change him more than he could ever change it. The biomimetic disguise felt strange on Zethkal's skin as he walked through the crowded streets of New York City. He had chosen to appear as a tall, thin human male with pale skin and dark hair. The false identity he had created was simple but effective. Dr. Alexander Gray, a visiting researcher from Sweden studying international relations, the noise hit him first. Vraxian cities were quiet, with citizens moving silently through clean corridors. But human cities were full of sound, cars honking, people shouting, music playing from open windows, construction machines grinding and hammering. It was chaos. And it made his head hurt. Then came the smells. Exhaust fumes from primitive vehicles mixed with food cooking in restaurants and the scent of millions of humans packed together in one place. On his homeworld, the air was always clean and filtered. Here, every breath brought new and overwhelming sensations. The humans themselves were the strangest part. They moved without pattern or purpose, bumping into each other, stopping suddenly, changing direction for no logical reason. They wore clothing in dozens of different styles and colors. Some were talking loudly into small devices pressed against their ears. Others were staring at glowing screens in their hands while walking. How do they get anything done? Zethkal wondered. This is complete disorder. He had studied human behavior from their broadcasts, but being among them was different. Their emotions were written on their faces: happiness, anger, fear, excitement, sadness. Vraxians had learned to control such displays centuries ago. These humans wore their feelings like bright banners for everyone to see. After spending a morning observing the chaos of Times Square, Zethkal made his way to Columbia University. His research had shown that universities were places where humans gathered to share knowledge. Perhaps the academics would be more logical than the common people on the streets. Dr. Lisa Murphy was exactly the kind of human he needed to meet. She was a professor of political science who specialized in international relations. Her office was small and cluttered with books, papers, and coffee cups. She welcomed him with a warm smile and genuine interest in his supposed research. Sweden has such a fascinating approach to diplomacy, she said, pouring him coffee from a pot that looked like it had been used for years. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how smaller nations can influence global politics. Zethkal had prepared for this conversation, but Lisa's enthusiasm caught him off guard. She spoke with passion about her work, about the importance of understanding different cultures, about the hope that humans could learn to work together better. Her eyes lit up when she talked about her students and their potential to change the world. Humans are incredible, she said, leaning forward in her chair. We're capable of the most beautiful cooperation and the most terrible destruction, sometimes in the same day. It's what makes us so interesting to study. She arranged for him to observe sessions at the United Nations. Zethkal expected to see the same chaos he had witnessed on the streets, but organized around tables and microphones. Instead, he found something that confused him deeply. The Security Council was debating a crisis in a small African nation. A civil war had left thousands of civilians trapped in a city with no food, water, or medical supplies. The images on the screens showed children crying, families huddled in destroyed buildings, and hospitals overflowing with wounded people. Ambassador Patricia Williams from the United States stood to address the council. Her voice was strong, but Zethkal could hear emotion underneath the professional tone. She spoke about the moral obligation to help, about the international community's responsibility to protect innocent people. We cannot stand by and watch while children starve, she said. We have the resources to help these people. We have the aircraft to deliver supplies. We have the medical teams to treat the wounded. How can we call ourselves civilized if we do nothing? The Russian representative, Viktor Petrov, disagreed with her proposed solution, but not with her basic point. My government shares the concern for civilian casualties, he said, but we must be careful not to make the situation worse. We propose working through local aid organizations rather than direct military intervention. Other ambassadors joined the discussion. The French representative talked about setting up refugee camps. The British ambassador suggested economic sanctions against the warring factions. The Chinese delegate offered to provide medical supplies and food aid. Zethkal found himself completely confused. These humans were talking about spending enormous amounts of money and resources to help people they had never met in a country that offered them no strategic advantage. By Vraxian logic, this made no sense at all. When the Vraxians conquered a planet, they calculated the exact cost in ships, weapons, and personnel. They only acted when the potential gains outweighed the expenses. But these humans were proposing to spend billions of credits to save lives that had no economic value to them. After the session, Zethkal approached Ambassador Williams in the hallway. Your speech was very moving, he said. But surely your nation's primary concern must be protecting its own interests? Patricia looked at him with surprise. Of course we consider our national interest, Dr. Gray, but we also have to consider our human interests. Those people suffering in that city, they're not just statistics in a report. They're mothers and fathers, children and grandparents. They're human beings just like us. She paused, studying his face. I have a daughter about the same age as some of those children we saw in the video. When I look at their faces, I see her face. How could I sleep at night knowing I had the power to help them and chose not to? That evening, Zethkal returned to his hotel room and tried to write his first report to the High Council. He sat at the small desk, staring at the blank screen of his communication device. How could he explain what he had seen? The humans were not acting according to any logical pattern he understood. They were making decisions based on emotion, on abstract concepts like moral obligation and human dignity. They were willing to spend resources on people who could never repay them, in situations that brought no benefit to their own nation. Finally, he wrote, "Initial observations confirm that humans are driven by emotion rather than logic. They display irrational altruistic behavior when dealing with other humans in distress. This weakness could potentially be exploited in future operations, but even as he sent the message, something bothered him. The look in Patricia Williams' eyes when she spoke about the suffering children was not what he would call weakness. There was strength there, a kind of determination that seemed to come from deep inside her. The next day, Lisa took him to a local hospital where she volunteered in her spare time. "I like to read to the children in the cancer ward," she explained. "It helps them forget their pain for a while." Zethkal watched her sit with sick children, her voice gentle as she read them stories about brave heroes and magical kingdoms. The children's faces brightened as they listened, their fear replaced by wonder and hope. "Why do you do this?" he asked her later. "These children are not your responsibility." Lisa smiled at him. "They don't have to be my responsibility for me to care about them. They're hurt, and I can help make them feel better. That's enough reason for me." A nurse named Janet Rogers joined their conversation. She had been working at the hospital for 20 years, taking care of patients with no family, holding the hands of people who were dying alone. "The pay isn't great," Janet admitted, "and the work is hard. But every day I come here, I know I'm making a difference in someone's life. That's worth more than money." Zethkal left the hospital with more questions than answers. These humans were spending their own time and energy helping strangers, with no expectation of reward or recognition. It defied everything he understood about rational behavior. As he walked back through the noisy, chaotic streets of New York, he found himself looking at the humans around him with new eyes. Each one was carrying their own struggles, their own fears and hopes. Yet somehow they kept finding ways to help each other. He was beginning to suspect that his mission might be more complicated than the High Council had expected. 3 weeks had passed since Zethkal arrived on Earth, and he still felt like he was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Every day brought new examples of human behavior that made no sense to his Vraxian mind. Today was Memorial Day, and Lisa had suggested he attend the ceremony at Arlington National Cemetery to better understand American culture. The morning was warm and sunny as thousands of humans gathered among the white headstones that stretched out like a sea of marble. Zethkal had expected to observe some kind of military display, perhaps a celebration of conquest like the victory parades on his homeworld. Instead, he found something completely different. The humans were quiet and respectful. Many carried flowers, small flags, or photographs. Some walked slowly between the graves, stopping to kneel beside specific markers. Others stood in small groups, talking in hushed voices. The atmosphere was solemn, almost sacred. Zethkal noticed an elderly man standing alone in front of one of the headstones. The man's shoulders were shaking, and tears were streaming down his weathered face. His name was Carl Peterson, and he had been coming to this spot every Memorial Day for 15 years. "My boy Danny," Carl whispered to the stone, his voice barely audible. "He was only 19 when he died. Just a kid who wanted to help people." Zethkal approached carefully. "Your son was a soldier?" Carl looked up, his eyes red but fierce with pride. "Best soldier in his unit. Could have stayed safe at the base, but he volunteered for every dangerous mission. Said those Afghan villagers needed someone to protect them from the Taliban." "He died protecting strangers?" Zethkal asked. "He died protecting people," Carl corrected. Didn't matter to Danny that they spoke a different language or had different customs. They were human beings in danger, and that was enough for him. The old man reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn photograph. It showed a young man in uniform, smiling brightly at the camera. The day before he died, Danny's unit was escorting a convoy of medical supplies to a village. Taliban fighters attacked the convoy, and Danny threw himself on a grenade to save the medics and the villagers they were trying to help. Zethkal stared at the photograph. He sacrificed his life for people he barely knew. That's what humans do, Carl said simply. We protect each other. We take care of each other. That's who we are. As the ceremony continued, Zethkal heard story after story that challenged everything he thought he knew about warfare and sacrifice. A young woman named Amanda Foster spoke about her husband, a combat medic who had died treating wounded enemy. Soldiers. Jake said it didn't matter what uniform they wore or what side they fought for, Amanda told the crowd. They were hurt, and he was trained to heal. That's what made him human. The speaker after Amanda was a retired general named Robert Hayes. He talked about soldiers who had died not for territory or resources, but for principles. They died believing that freedom is worth protecting, that innocent people deserve to live without fear, that some things are more important than our own safety. Zethkal found himself deeply disturbed by these stories. On his home world, soldiers died for the glory of the Empire, for the expansion of Vraxian territory, for logical, strategic goals. But these humans were dying for abstract concepts like justice and compassion. After the ceremony, he walked through the cemetery, reading the names on the headstones. Each one represented a human who had chosen to risk everything for others. Some had died in famous battles, others in small skirmishes that most people would never hear about. But all of them had made the same choice, to put other people's welfare above their own survival. That evening, Zethkal attended a community meeting in a small town outside Washington. He expected to observe how humans organized their local government, but instead found himself witnessing something that shook him to his core. The meeting was about the Johnson family, who had lost their home in a fire the week before. Bill Johnson worked at the local hardware store, and his wife Mary was a school teacher. They had 2 young children and had lost everything except the clothes they were wearing when the fire started. "We need to help them get back on their feet," said the fire chief, Ben Harris. "They're good people, and they're part of our community." Within 2 hours, the townspeople had organized everything the Johnson family needed. Mrs. Helen Cooper offered them the empty apartment above her store, rent-free for 6 months. The owner of the local restaurant, Tony Martinez, committed to providing free meals for the family. Dr. Susan Wright volunteered to handle any medical needs without charge. "We take care of our own," Ben explained to the crowd. "And by our own, I mean anyone who needs help." But it wasn't just the big contributions that amazed Zethkal. Children brought piggy banks full of coins they had been saving. Teenagers offered to babysit for free. Elderly people volunteered to help with shopping and cooking. Everyone found some way to contribute, no matter how small. "How do you decide who deserves help?" Zethkal asked Ben after the meeting. Ben looked at him with confusion. "Decide? There's nothing to decide. They need help, and we can provide it. That's all there is to it." "But what if helping them costs more than they can ever repay?" "Repay?" Ben laughed. "Dr. Gray, you're thinking about this all wrong. We're not doing business here. We're being neighbors. When someone in your community is hurting, you help them, period." Over the following days, Zethkal watched the town rally around the Johnson family. People donated furniture, clothes, toys for the children, and household items. Local contractors volunteered their time to help rebuild the house. The school organized a fundraiser to replace the children's lost books and supplies. Most remarkable was that many of the people helping had their own problems. Tom Bradley, who donated a week's worth of groceries, was struggling to pay his own bills. Sarah Collins, who gave the family her children's outgrown clothes, was a single mother working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Yet they all found ways to help. "We've all been through hard times," Sarah explained when Zethkal asked why she was helping. When my husband left, this community kept me and my kids fed and housed until I could get back on my feet. Now it's my turn to help someone else. The pattern was everywhere once this call learned to see it. Humans helping humans, not because they had to, not because they would benefit, but simply because it was the right thing to do. It was completely illogical by Vraxian standards, yet it seemed to be the foundation of human society. He watched. A group of teenagers spend their Saturday cleaning up a park that had been vandalized. He saw office workers donate blood during their lunch breaks. He observed parents volunteering at schools, citizens helping elderly neighbors with their groceries, and strangers giving directions to lost tourists. Each act of kindness was small, but together they created something that no Vraxian civilization had ever achieved. These humans had built a society based not on fear and control, but on mutual care and voluntary cooperation. That night, Zethkal tried to write his second report to the High Council. But how could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he describe the strength he had seen in humans who chose to help others even when it cost them dearly? Finally, he wrote, "Human altruism appears to be a fundamental characteristic rather than a weakness. They demonstrate consistent willingness to sacrifice personal resources for the benefit of others. Request additional observation time to better understand this phenomenon." As he sent the message, Zethkal realized that his mission was changing. He had come to Earth to find human weaknesses, but instead he was discovering a kind of strength that his people had never possessed. The humans weren't weak because they cared about each other. They were strong because of it. For the first time in his life, he began to question whether the Vraxian way was truly superior. A month had passed since Zethkal arrived on Earth, and he found himself in Houston, Texas, standing outside a children's hospital. He had told himself this was research, another opportunity to study human behavior in extreme circumstances. What he expected to find was despair, selfishness, and the breakdown of social order in the face of tragedy. The hospital was enormous, with gleaming white walls and large windows that let in the warm Texas sunlight. Children and families moved through the corridors, some in wheelchairs, others walking slowly with the help of nurses and doctors. The atmosphere should have been dark and hopeless, but somehow it wasn't. Zethkal met Dr. Susan Mitchell on his first day there. She was a pediatric oncologist who had been working at the hospital for 15 years, treating children with cancer. Her hair was starting to turn gray, and there were lines around her eyes that spoke of long nights and difficult decisions. "Why do you do this work?" Zethkal asked her as they walked through the oncology ward. "Many of these children will die despite your efforts. By any logical measure, your work seems futile." Dr. Mitchell stopped walking and looked at him with surprise. "Futile?" "Dr. Gray, every day I save a child is a day I've made the universe a little brighter. Every day I ease someone's pain is a day I've fulfilled my purpose as a human being." She gestured toward the rooms they were passing. "These children aren't statistics in a medical journal. They're individuals with dreams, families who love them, futures that matter. Even when I can't cure them, I can help them live with dignity and hope." In the first room they visited, Zethkal met 8-year-old Kevin Brooks, a boy with leukemia. Kevin's parents, Mary and John, had sold their house and moved across the country so their son could receive treatment at this hospital. They had been living in a small apartment nearby for 6 months, taking turns sleeping in the hospital room. "We'd do anything for him," Mary told Zethkal, her hand gently stroking Kevin's hair as he slept. "John quit his job so we could move here. We sold everything we owned. But Kevin is our world. You'd understand if you were a parent." John nodded, his eyes never leaving his son's face. "The doctors here are the best. If anyone can save Kevin, they can. We'll stay as long as it takes." But it wasn't just the parents who amazed Zethkal. The entire hospital seemed to function on a level of selfless dedication that made no sense to his Vraxian mind. Nurses stayed late without extra pay to comfort frightened children. Volunteers came in every day to read stories, play games, and simply provide companionship to young patients. He watched a woman named Patricia Adams, who had been volunteering at the hospital for 10 years. She spent her days making care packages for families who couldn't afford basic necessities, organizing activities for the children, and simply being present when parents needed someone to talk to. My own daughter was treated here 20 years ago, Patricia explained. She survived, and now she's a teacher with children of her own. I volunteer here because I remember how scared and alone we felt, and I want to make sure no other family has to go through that without support. The most disturbing case for Zethkal was a 12-year-old girl named Ashley Price. She had been diagnosed with a terminal brain tumor 6 months earlier. The doctors had tried everything, but the cancer continued to grow. Ashley had perhaps 3 months left to live. Instead of retreating into despair, Ashley spent her days helping other patients. She made greeting cards for children who were starting treatment, organized fundraisers for families who couldn't afford medical bills, and created art projects to brighten the hospital rooms. I want to help while I can, Ashley explained to Zethkal, her voice weak but determined. Everyone here is fighting so hard. The doctors, the nurses, the other kids, their families. I want to be part of that fight. She showed him a painting she had made for the hospital lobby. It depicted children of different ages and backgrounds, all holding hands under a bright rainbow. I call it hope, she said, because that's what we all need, even when things look impossible. Zethkal found himself unable to speak. This child, facing death, was using her remaining time and energy to help others. It defied every principle of survival and self-preservation that formed the foundation of Vraxian society. The next day, he observed Dr. Mitchell performing surgery on a 7-year-old boy named Marcus Williams. The operation lasted 14 hours, and Dr. Mitchell never left the operating room. When she finally emerged, exhausted and drained, the surgery had been successful. Why do you push yourself so hard? Zethkal asked her as she sat in the break room, drinking coffee with shaking hands. Because that little boy deserves every chance I can give him, she replied. His parents are trusting me with the most precious thing in their lives. How can I give anything less than everything I have? Later that week, Zethkal witnessed something that shook him even more deeply. A 10-year-old patient named Emma Rodriguez was in the final stages of her illness. Her parents, Carlos and Maria, had been told there was nothing more the doctors could do. Instead of taking Emma home to die, they asked if she could stay at the hospital to be near the other children she had befriended. She's happier here, Maria explained. These kids and the staff have become her family. She wants to spend her last days with them. The hospital staff went far beyond their medical duties. They organized a birthday party for Emma, complete with decorations, cake, and presents from the other patients. They set up a special room where she could continue her art projects. They made sure she was never alone or afraid. When Emma finally died, surrounded by the people she loved, the entire hospital mourned. Children who barely knew her cried for their lost friend. Nurses and doctors who had seen hundreds of patients die wept openly in the hallways. The hospital held a memorial service where everyone shared stories about Emma's courage and kindness. She taught us all how to live, Dr. Mitchell said at the service. She showed us that even in the face of death, we can choose to love, to help, to hope. That's what makes us human. Zethkal left the hospital that day completely shattered. He had come expecting to find human weakness, but instead he had discovered something that no Vraxian had ever experienced. These humans had looked directly into the face of death and suffering, and their response was not to retreat or despair, but to love more deeply. He thought about his own people, the Vraxians, with their perfect logic and efficient society. They had eliminated suffering by eliminating emotion. They had achieved order by removing chaos. But in doing so, they had also eliminated something essential, something that made life worth living. That night, he sat on the roof of his hotel, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Vraxian fleet was waiting for his report. They expected him to find the best way to conquer Earth, to add another species to their empire. But how could he help destroy beings who were capable of such incredible love and sacrifice? For the first time in his life, Zethkal began to question everything he had been taught about strength, about logic, about what it meant to be superior? The Vraxians had conquered through fear and calculation. But these humans had conquered something far more difficult. They had conquered their own selfish instincts and chosen to care for each other. His third report to the High Council was shorter than the others, require extended observation period. Previous assessments were incomplete. Human behavior patterns more complex than initially calculated. But even as he sent the message, Zethkal knew he was lying to his own people. The truth was far more disturbing than incomplete data. The truth was that he was beginning to understand that the humans weren't the primitive species that needed to be conquered. They were the teachers, and he was the student who had everything to learn. The earthquake hit California at 4:47 in the morning, measuring 7.8 on the Richter scale. Zethkal had been in Los Angeles for only 2 days when the ground began to shake violently, throwing him from his hotel bed. Buildings swayed, windows shattered, and car alarms wailed throughout the city. This was exactly the kind of disaster that would reveal the true nature of any species, according to Vraxian models. Natural disasters cause civilizations to collapse into chaos. People would panic, fight over resources, and abandon the weak. To save themselves, social order would break down as survival instincts took over. This was the perfect opportunity for Zethkal to observe human behavior under extreme stress. Instead, he witnessed something that completely shattered his understanding of what it meant to be human. Within minutes of the quake, sirens filled the air. Emergency vehicles raced through the damaged streets, their drivers navigating around fallen debris and cracked pavement. Zethkal followed the sound of the sirens to a collapsed apartment building where rescue workers were already setting up their equipment. Captain Maria Santos of the Los Angeles Fire Department was directing the rescue operation. She was a small woman, barely reaching Zethkal's shoulder, but she commanded her team with calm authority. When she learned that people were trapped in the building's basement, she didn't hesitate. "I'm going in," she announced, strapping on her helmet and checking her equipment. "Captain, the building could collapse completely," one of her men warned. "That's why we need to get them out now," Maria replied. "Every minute we wait, their chances get worse." Zethkal watched in amazement as Maria crawled into the dangerous ruins, following the sound of voices calling for help. She emerged 20 minutes later with an elderly man on her back, then immediately went back in for the next person. She made 4 trips into the unstable building, each time risking her own life to save strangers, but it wasn't just the professional rescuers who amazed him. Ordinary civilians were organizing themselves into human chains, passing supplies to rescue workers and helping evacuate injured people. A gang member named Tony Rodriguez worked side by side with police officers he had probably been fighting with just days before. "None of that matters now," Tony explained when Zethkal asked about the unusual cooperation. "People are hurt. People need help. That's all that matters." The most incredible sight was a makeshift medical station set up in a parking lot. Dr. Rachel Kim, a surgeon from nearby Cedars-Sinai Hospital, had been driving to work when the earthquake hit. Instead of seeking safety, she had stopped her car and begun treating injured people with whatever supplies she could find. "Dr. Kim, you've been working for 18 hours straight," a nurse told her. "You need to rest." "People are dying," Rachel replied without looking up from the patient she was treating. "How can I rest when people are dying?" Zethkal watched her work through the night and into the next day. Her hands never stopped moving, her voice never lost its calm professionalism. She treated everyone who came to her, rich and poor, young and old, citizens and immigrants. She asked no questions about their ability to pay or their legal status. She simply healed whoever needed healing. On the second day, Zethkal encountered Frank and Betty Chun, an elderly couple who had refused evacuation from their damaged apartment building. When rescue workers tried to force them to leave, they discovered why the couple was staying behind. "We can't leave Mrs. Patterson," Betty explained. "She's 93 and can barely walk. She has no family, no one to help her. We've been taking care of her for 5 years now." Frank nodded, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "She's our neighbor." "You don't abandon your neighbors." The rescue workers found Mrs. Patterson in her apartment, too frail to evacuate on her own. The Shuns had been bringing her food and water, helping her with her medications, and keeping her company so she wouldn't be afraid. They had chosen to risk their own lives rather than abandon someone who needed them. At a temporary shelter set up in a school gymnasium, Zethkal met Linda Baker, a teacher who had been separated from her own family in the chaos. Instead of searching for her husband and children, she was comforting terrified children whose parents were missing. "My family is strong," she told Zethkal. "They can take care of themselves for a while, but these little ones need someone right now. I can't leave them alone and scared." She had organized games for the children, found blankets to keep them warm, and made sure they had food and water. She sang lullabies to help them sleep and told stories to distract them from the frightening sounds outside. Construction worker Mike Powell became a local hero when he spent 36 hours digging through rubble with his bare hands to reach survivors in a collapsed shopping center. His fingers were bloody and broken, his back aching from hours of crawling through tight spaces, but he refused to stop. "I can hear them calling for help," he said when paramedics tried to treat his injuries. "As long as they're alive in there, I'm not giving up." He saved 7 people from the wreckage, including a pregnant woman and her 3-year-old daughter. When reporters called him a hero, Mike just shrugged. Anyone would have done the same thing. You don't leave people trapped when you can help them. But the moment that completely destroyed Zethkal's understanding of humanity came on the 3rd day. He was helping distribute food at a relief station when he saw 8-year-old Emma Johnson. The girl had been pulled from the ruins of her school, her leg broken, her face covered in dust and tears. Instead of crying for herself, Emma was trying to comfort a younger child who was screaming in terror. The little boy, maybe 4 years old, was calling for his mother, who was still missing. Emma had wrapped her arms around him, ignoring her own pain. "It's okay, Tommy," she whispered, her voice gentle despite her own fear. "The nice people are here to help us. They're going to find your mommy. We're going to be okay." She stayed with Tommy for hours, telling him stories, sharing her juice box with him, and holding his hand when he cried. When the Red Cross workers finally found Tommy's mother, Emma smiled through her own tears as the family was reunited. "Why did you help him?" Zethkal asked her later as medics were putting a cast on her leg. "He was scared," Emma said simply. "Nobody should be scared alone. My mommy always says we should help people who are sad or scared." At that moment, Zethkal realized he was witnessing something that no Vraxian had ever experienced or could even comprehend. These humans didn't just survive disasters, they transcended them. They looked into the face of death and destruction and chose to respond with love, courage, and hope. The Vraxians had built their empire on the principle that survival was the highest goal. But these humans had discovered something higher than survival. They had learned to live for each other, to sacrifice for each other, to love each other even when it meant risking everything. That night, Zethkal tried to write his final report to the High Council. But how could he explain what he had witnessed? How could he describe a species that had evolved beyond the need for conquest because they had conquered themselves? His report was long and confused, filled with contradictions and impossible claims. He wrote about humans who died for strangers, who sacrificed for enemies, who loved without condition. He tried to explain that these weren't weaknesses but strengths, that humanity's greatest power came not from their weapons or technology, but from their capacity to care for each other. "Do not attack Earth," he concluded. "Do not conquer humanity. They are not our enemies. They are our teachers. They have discovered what we lost long ago, what it means to be truly alive." When the High Council received his report, they declared Ambassador Zethkal mentally compromised and ordered his immediate return. But it was too late. Zethkal had already made his choice. He had requested asylum from the United Nations, not as a spy or conqueror, but as a being who had discovered something worth protecting. Standing before the UN General Assembly, no longer disguised, he spoke his final words as a Vraxian. "You are not the strongest species in the galaxy. You are not the most advanced, but you are the most human. And that is the greatest strength of all."